Dr. Cassio at the Louisiana School Nurses Convention, and he asked me to speak to y'all today. I retired after 27 years and I coached. I am CPR and AED instructor certified. I have my EMT basic, and I'm a current board trustee for the Elysian Fields ISD in East Texas. Along with my husband Scott, who's in the back, and our other son Derek, we created the Brandon Goyne Foundation, and this is our story. Brandon is the young man on your left in the yellow shirt. There you go. In January of 2013, Brandon and Derek are both our sons, and they were playing baseball at LSU in Alexandria. And Derek called me and he said, Mom, they're doing CPR on Brandon. And I was like, what are you talking about? I had just talked to them 2 hours earlier. They needed money. And so they were fine. Everything was fine. So as we talked to Derek to find out what was going on, he had no idea what was going on. They did do CPR immediately. They did get the AED on him. Acadian Ambulance Service responded, and they got him to Rapides Parish Hospital, but he did not survive. I was in Dallas at a conference, and my husband's a forester, and he was out in the woods, so it took us a while to get there because they were in Ellick. And I picked my sister up in Greenwood, and so she could ride with me. And she said, you want me to drive? I was like, no, I'll drive. And my phone just kept ringing and ringing. I said, look on Facebook. Everybody keeps calling me, what's going on? See what's happening. So she looks and she goes, nope, nothing on there. In reality, it was all over Facebook. We didn't know what was going on because we weren't to the hospital yet. Brandon ended up collapsing and having a sudden cardiac arrest on the baseball field at LSU, January 18th. And of course, when we got to the hospital, we didn't know what was going on. We had no idea. Brandon was perfectly healthy, as you can see. Toxicology report shows no drugs, no steroids. We had no idea what was going on. Now, I taught school for 27 years and I coached. And I thankfully never had a student or an athlete collapse like this before. And so as we waited for the autopsy to come back and tell us what was going on, the coroner's office finally called and he said, Brandon has ARVD, arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia. And he says, the truth is, Miss Goyne, I've never seen it. I've only studied it in books. I said, okay, so what do we do? So we ended up calling Johns Hopkins University because they have an ARVD research lab. And we sent all the stuff, the tissues, samples, up to Johns Hopkins, and they concurred, yes, it was ARVD. 3 to 4% of cardiac issues are ARVD, and it's genetic. So then we went, okay, it's genetic. So my husband and I got tested. Our parents got tested. Our other son, Derek, who's 2 years older than Brandon, got tested, and our grandson got tested, and nobody has it. So then they connected us with a genetic counselor, and with the genetics, GeneDx out of Maryland, we asked them, how can our son have a genetic problem that causes sudden cardiac death, yet none of us have it? And she said the only thing they can come up with is that it was a mutation in Brandon because none of us have it. And genetically speaking, it might skip 1 generation, but it does not skip 4. So then we said, okay, God, what do you want us to do with this? A genetic condition that nobody has, but my sweet baby that didn't survive. So I got on the internet and I started looking and emailing and trying to find out what I could do. And I found this company called Who We Play For. They actually used to be called Cypress ECG Project, and they're out of Houston. They've been doing EKG screenings since 2002. As we found out more and more about ARVD, we found out that an EKG would have found Brandon's condition, but Brandon had 7 physicals in 9 years. In Texas, you're required 7th grade, 9th grade, 11th grade, all 3 years of college, and then he had to have an extra one for his summer job one summer. So he'd had 7 in 9 years and nothing picked it up because it was an electrical abnormality and you can't hear electricity with a stethoscope. So when I found all of that out, then we found this group, Who We Play For, that offers EKG screenings for $15 a student. I hooked them up with Elysian Fields ISD, which is where I taught school, and with Wascom ISD, which is the nearest school district beside us. And we screened over 400 students between the two of us, and we are a small school district. And as we screened people, they were like, Ms. Goyne, what are we going to do? What can we do to this? And I said, let's figure it out. So we created the Brandon Goyne Foundation, and what we do is we champion the cause for EKGs to be a required part of athletic physicals, not only for athletes, but for students. I really think they need to be when students start school. You know, you have to have your shots, basically, that it needs to have a baseline. So we travel, and we talk to organizations like yours. We also go to schools, and I work for them full time now. I travel Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas, and we offer the EKGs. We raise money through the foundation. We talk to local businesses. Ultimately, we'd like to offer it free for people because even $15 for many people, that's tough for them. As we've tested and as we have traveled, statistically what we've found is that 95% of the students that are tested are low risk, according to that particular EKG or ECG. 3.5% show that their numbers are off a little bit and that they need a second opinion, which you would get a second opinion on many things medically that you might found to be off. And then 0.05, we have found people that definitely have an issue. We red flag it, and they definitely need to see a cardiologist. The person that is red flagged needs to be pulled from participation, but the person that's yellow flagged can still participate. They just need to see somebody within 3 to 4 months. Our cardiologist's name is Dr. Thomas DeBosch, and he is located in Cy-Fair ISD, Cypress, Texas, which is north of Houston, and he is the one that actually started the company. He was the team doctor for his children as they played, sports, and you have to have your physicals. He did the physicals. Since he was a cardiologist, he threw in an EKG. They found somebody that had a condition and ended up having to have heart surgery, and that's where all of it started. The amazing thing to me is that I taught school and I coached for 27 years, and truly I never heard of sudden cardiac arrest. I heard of basketball players collapsing on the basketball court from an undiagnosed heart condition. I've heard of football players that were dehydrated, having cardiac issues, but never in a million years did I ever think my child would have anything like that, ever. So healthy, worked out all the time. With arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia, what happens is, as he worked out, his heart developed scar tissue instead of just strengthening muscle. You've probably heard of HCM, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which majority of heart conditions that athletes suffer, it's HCM, the heart enlarges, like 80%. But with ARVD, it's very small, it's 3 to 4%. As his heart developed scar tissue, basically what happened was on the baseball field that day, all of a sudden there was no muscle for the electrical impulse to go through, so he collapsed. They said that he caught the ball, took a step, and collapsed. Not only was the baseball team practicing, but the softball team was too. His girlfriend played on the softball team. And so it's really, school-wise, it affected lots of people at one time. As we travel and go throughout the states, what we are trying to do is to have a positive impact on people and get the EKGs hopefully required, but if not required, at least offered. It's just like medicine. You can't make people take their medicine even though they probably should. With EKGs, we would just like it to be offered, and then parents can make their own decision on it. Ultimately, we want it to be mandated. So after everything happened with Brandon, we found a national group called the Parent Heart Watch. And so we go to the convention, and there's over 200 families there, and everybody's there because they've lost a child to sudden cardiac arrest. The young man on the right is Adam. He also collapsed from a sudden cardiac arrest. He had HCM, and his parents started the Project Adam, and they pushed to have AEDs added into schools. In the state of Texas, it is mandatory for all schools to have AEDs, and y'all were just talking about in Louisiana, that is in process, is that right, or is it mandated? Anybody know?
It just became law.
It just became law?
August 8/1.
Awesome. Okay, so that's great. Okay, so sudden cardiac arrest, it can happen anywhere, anytime, and it happens to kids too. And when I say kids, I don't mean high school kids, I mean little kids. It's the #1 killer of young athletes. Because athletes work out like they do, especially in college with their intense level, they increase their workout. That is why sudden cardiac arrest is so common. Statistically, one student every 3 days collapses in the United States. And as you look at it with social media like it is, you hear about it more and more. You've heard of people in the past, like Pete Maravich, he collapsed and he had a heart condition many years ago. And so you've heard of things like that. But we hear so much more now because social media gives us that opportunity. Strikes those who are sedentary, and like I told you all that. I'm not going to read it all to you, but you do need to know that it does happen way more often than we think it does. These are pictures of students in the state of Louisiana who have passed away from a sudden cardiac arrest. Chad is the Chad Barcia Foundation out of New Orleans. Burke is the Living for Burke Foundation out of Baton Rouge. And Shane is the Shane Ozine Foundation out of Lafayette. All three of them collapsed and suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. They all have websites. Chad was playing lacrosse, even though he's a big old football player. Burke happened to be at the school in the gym in Baton Rouge, collapsed, and the AEDs were not used, even though they were right down the hall, but they were locked up and they didn't have the keys. And Shane also collapsed. This is Sarah Friend. Her mother is Laura Friend, and she is one of the creators of the Parent Heart Watch that's now national. She was at a local swimming pool and she was taking lifeguard lessons. And they said that she just fell off the ladder and they also did not do CPR at the time. American Heart Association explains, as you can see, that when the heart suddenly stops beating due to an irregular heart rhythm, sudden cardiac arrest occurs. An underlying cardiac condition such as enlarged heart or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy can contribute to the incident. In many cases, the cause is unknown. A lot of times people will collapse and they don't do an autopsy, so you don't know what the cause was. With Brandon being on the ball field at school, we of course required it. But I will tell you this, if Brandon had been driving and had had a car wreck, I really would have thought he was texting and driving. I would have, because we used to get on to him all the time. Brandon, quit doing that, don't do that. And he would laugh, haha, Mom, okay. But I really would have thought that he was doing something like that. We never would have had an autopsy done. We never would have known that he had a sudden cardiac arrest. Here's Bran. The children affected usually have no underlying cardiac conditions or symptoms that can be recognized in a normal pediatric physical. Brandon never complained of feeling bad. If he did feel bad, then he always felt that way, so he didn't know he felt bad. It's the only conclusion we can come to. He had his physicals. He had just been to the doctor in January, actually, and there's nothing. These are more students, and that's what I really want you to see is how healthy everybody looks. And they all suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. These people are all in Texas. Caitlin was in the Dallas area. She also had ARVD like Bran. Cameron was a track star in the Dallas area, and Cody is with the Cody Stevens Foundation, which is outside of Houston. They're called the Go Big or Go Home Foundation. Cody was going to football scholarship at Tarleton, 6'9", like 275 or something, big, huge kid. And sat down in the easy chair 3 weeks before high school graduation and never got up. Never complained, never felt bad. He had HCM. Of course, what we want to do, the primary prevention is to optimize affordable screening, which is what we're talking about. Add EKGs to required athletic physicals, add EKGs to school entrance requirements. I really think that was a great idea. And as we have talked to more and more people, especially cardiologists, it's really interesting because people are for it. Parents are especially for it. They want their child to be safe. But the American Heart Association will not agree to it yet. Their main reason is because they have the 14-point questionnaire that they have, and that should be enough. Although I will tell you, Brandon never had one symptom that we're aware of. Secondary prevention, of course, CPR and AED. You also need to know that it doesn't just happen to athletes, it does happen to younger people. Both of these little girls were diagnosed after they passed away. They did the autopsy and they found to have a sudden cardiac arrest, suffered from that. And Madison's parents are real big up in the New York area. Warning signs that everyone should know. You probably already know all this about, have you ever fainted? Have you ever had shortness of breath? extreme fatigue after exercise. And when we do EKG screenings, we actually ask them all of these questions. Have you ever been diagnosed with a heart murmur? And it's interesting because when we're asking them the questions, a lot of times the kids will tell me, well, yeah, I have had shortness of breath. But on their form, it's marked no, because they don't tell their parents that they've had shortness of breath. And many times, as you well know, when people get ready to do their physicals and they have big old stack of papers and your parents have to sign it, they're just flipping through there, sign, because there's like 10 or 11 pages. So they don't even really pay attention to read it. In Texas, we have a form called the Sudden Cardiac Awareness Form that everybody has to sign, and it says on there, sudden cardiac death does happen, and you sign saying, yes, I know that it does, but that I don't want my child to have an EKG. So we're pushing to have another box added to that that says, yes, I would like my child to have an EKG, and then that way the school district would have to at least allow people to come in and offer it. Throughout the United States, there are foundations that offer the EKG screenings. We'll actually be in New Orleans next weekend at Orange Theory Fitness, 4141 Bienville, if you'd like to come by, if you happen to live that way. But we go all over the place, and many people want the screenings. By the way, it takes about 3 minutes a person. Here's the sudden cardiac, the death assessment form, that the 14 questions that everybody has to fill out and look at. In Texas, we have UIL and the Texas Association of Private and Parochial Schools. In Louisiana, y'all have Louisiana High School Athletic Association, but it all works along the same lines. Interestingly enough, and that's why I put this in here, this is Gilmer High School. The students all signed their sudden cardiac arrest form, but they lost a student to a heart condition last year, even though they had signed the form, because you just don't think it's going to happen to your school. All staff members know the plan, the emergency action plan, so I won't go over all that because you've heard it before this morning. That's why I wanted to sit in and see what everybody was saying. But an emergency action plan is vitally important. Just like you have tornado drills and fire drills, you need to have an emergency action plan for a cardiac drill. These people, this is somebody that was saved, that the coach was saved with an AED in Watauga, Texas. And so you, of course, in your profession, you know that AEDs work. The key is people using them. You know, people are scared of AEDs. It amazes me, but we go lots of places and that somebody does not want to open that AED, and it talks you through everything. Awareness is the key, as you well know. Have you looked for AEDs around here? I didn't see any. I'm sure they've got them because it's such a huge facility, but everywhere I go, I always look to see if there's an AED close by. Secondary prevention, they do say that if you see somebody collapse and they look like they're having a seizure, that you definitely need to be, more than likely, it's a sudden cardiac arrest. When Brandon collapsed, that's what Derek said. He said, Mom, he looks like he was having a seizure. And since then, we have learned that sudden cardiac arrest presents like a seizure. And many times people assume it's an epileptic seizure, so of course they treat it differently. But the latest information is that you treat it like a cardiac event. Being unresponsive and not breathing normally are the only two criteria needed to start CPR and the use of an AED. You should have your plan, which I know that you probably do, on calling 911, sending somebody to get the AED. Everybody, y'all all know how to use it. And this talks about drills, how important the drills are at schools. And do y'all know if your school has drills? Who was that man that was talking? Do you do a cardiac drill?
Cardiac drill, not required.
Not required. So that's
some of our administrators have, locally, just because we now require the principal, at least one assistant, at least one front office, and then the head coach and one assistant for every sport, the AED CPR first aid certified.
Yes, sir. Okay. And here, of course, is a checklist. Louisiana has yet to require, but y'all I didn't know that, so yay, for August the 1st, you'll have AEDs required in your schools. The Burke-Cobb Act of 2015, and you saw Living for Burke a couple of slides back, they went to the legislature in Louisiana, and now all students are required to have CPR AED training in the state of Louisiana before they graduate. I don't know how they are making sure it's getting done. I don't know any accountability with that, but I do know that
Part of their diploma track.
It is? Oh, wonderful. So here's our summary. Sudden cardiac arrest has many causes. Primary prevention strategies will never be perfect. People just don't believe that this could happen to their child or it could happen to one of their students, but the reality of it is, I'm here to tell you it can happen. And when it does, it is a horrible thing, because when you lose a spouse, you're a widow, and if a child loses parents, they're an orphan, but there's no word. If you lose a child, there's no definition for it. The American Heart Association wants you to be proactive. Stay healthy, eat right, keep your sodium levels down, exercise. They want us to be proactive on everything. And yet, we won't add EKGs, the most up-to-date technological advances that we have, to help our stethoscope out when it comes to testing the heart. Stethoscope is 200 years old. I bet most of you in here have a cell phone, you have a computer, but we don't use modern technology when it comes to our EKG testing on our children. And these are people who have been saved from using an AED. And here's our email address. If you want any more information, of course, you can email me at debbie.goyne@whoweplayfor.org. And then Laura Friend is the lady at Cook Children's that was kind enough to let me borrow part of her PowerPoint, so I'd have something to show you and not just stand here and talk. Do you have any questions?